Why is a shmup like a haiku? No, it's not a joke, there's no punchline, it's a real question, and in this video I'm going to explain why I think a shmup is like a haiku. So dig out your berets, folks, and stick a battered copy of Sartre in your back pocket, because we're about to get pretentious. Now, I read an article a while ago about how Ikaruga was like a poem. It was a terrible article. Just utter nonsense. It didn't make any better case for Ikaruga being poetry than when a football commentator describes a sweet strike as poetry in motion. It's just a meaningless cliche. But that's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that shmups are specifically like haikus. Now head out into the street and ask the first person you see what a haiku is, and you'll probably get an odd look as the person hurries away. But seriously, what will most people say? They'll say it's a Japanese poem with 17 syllables in 5/7/5 format. And it is that. But it's also a lot more. And to find out why a shmup is like a haiku, we'll first have to ascertain what that more refers to. So a haiku is indeed a 17-syllable form of Japanese poetry, but you can't just string together any bunch of words into a 17-syllable format and call it a haiku. There are far more rules than most people are aware of. It should contain a seasonal reference. In fact, it must contain a seasonal reference. There's even a prescribed list of seasonal references it should use. Many people claim it must also refer to directly observable real-world phenomena. A 17-syllable poem about how much you love the girl next door is not a haiku. It must contain some form of juxtaposition. It must even, in Japanese, use at least one syllable from a small range of grammatical particles to do that, and that particle should come at the end of one of the lines. What I'm saying here is when Mike Myers looks at Garth in Wayne's World and says, "Garth, that was a haiku," he was unfortunately wrong. And remember, by the way, all this must still fit into that 17-syllable format. It seems restrictive, and yet operating within those restrictions, poets, Japanese or otherwise, have come up with thousands of variations, displaying constant creativity, and on occasion creating what some people consider masterpieces. So what about shmups? Why are they like haikus? Well, we can start with the man in the street definition. A shmup is a horizontally or vertically scrolling video game in which a player controls a ship or character and shoots enemies. And again, just like with haikus, that's not exactly wrong, it's just not that simple either. See, while there are all sorts of shmups out there, and while the following rules are not and could never be codified anywhere, there are some unwritten rules most classic shmups abide by. We have the short length, 20 to 40 minutes for a playthrough. There should be multiple stages, usually 7, but anything between 5 and 9 is probably fine. Each stage should finish with a boss. The boss should be gigantic. The last boss for sure should transform, and most bosses should at least have different stages. The player should have a standard shot that never runs out and a smaller stack of bombs. The action should be nearly constant and the player should always be moving forward. You can see where I'm going with this. With all these rules, shmups look like one of the most restrictive forms of games to develop. And yet, far from that being the case, good shmup developers have innovated within that classic framework, producing a range of games and styles that constantly show us players things we've never seen before. In these restrictive settings, the choices developers do make are of huge importance. Does touching enemies cause damage? Does a bomb clear the whole screen? How big is the hitbox? Can the player control their movement speed? If so, how? Think of the great shmups and you'll see almost all of them follow the rules while putting their own personal stamp on things. Think of the crap ones, and you'll find dozens mired by cheap gimmicks designed to make them stand out, but which in reality just stop them being considered proper shmups. The format of the shmup, like that of the haiku, can look to many almost oppressively rigid, but look more closely to see how operating within those confines breeds creativity. It encourages it. The graze mechanic, color changes, chains and power absorption. With more freedom, these mechanics wouldn't need the tight focus to perfection we see in the best shmups. With longer levels, for example, the meticulous placement of every single enemy becomes impossible and less important. Just like how in a haiku every syllable is valuable, so is every moment in a shmup. There can be no pointless 30-minute side quests through empty terrain to fetch a treasured possession for an NPC. The game is trimmed down and honed so that every moment is key. Shmups are like haikus because they create and innovate within tight boundaries, and because those that operate outside those boundaries, far from doing something new and cool, usually end up ruining their work. So berries off, folks, put your cigarillos out. Let me know what you think. Were you nodding along, or were you shaking your head thinking, what a crock of shit? Either way, hope you enjoyed it, and bonsoir.